It's a Friday edition of PFT OT, and like so many other Fridays, the NFL has dumped some news into the slowest day of the week. Surely this is something that could have been announced on Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, or Monday, but it comes on Friday. Now, it wasn't 5 p.m. when the news came out. It was earlier in the day, right at the beginning of the day, that the NFL announced that Tyreek Hill, the Chiefs receiver, will not be suspended after an investigation under the personal conduct policy. And remember, there were three different aspects of the personal conduct policy that could have been violated by Hill. Number one, threats made to the mother of his children, Crystal Espinal. Number two, potential child abuse, discipline that crossed the line like it did with Adrian Peterson 5 years ago. And then finally, the circumstances in the household that resulted in the child being removed by the government. That is something that, under the language of the personal conduct policy, creating an undue risk for another person, especially a child, that could have resulted in some sort of discipline. But the NFL issued a statement focusing only on the issue of potential child abuse allegations. And there's some wiggle room in there. If some evidence would emerge in the future that would allow the NFL to go back and revisit the case, so be it. But the bottom line is, after meeting with Tyreek Hill for 8 hours several weeks ago, the league decided not to impose any discipline. And the thing that caught my attention, the failure to address in any way, shape, or form the threat, the apparent threat, and I don't know, maybe based upon some of the arguments we've had over words this week, maybe somebody would actually say it wasn't a threat. But when he said, "You need to be terrified of me too," to Crystal Espinal, while they were arguing the question of whether or not a 3-year-old boy who is Hill's son respects him or is terrified of him, that would seem to be something that at a minimum would require an explanation as to why discipline isn't being imposed. I've asked the league to give me some guidance in that regard, because that was the phrase. That was the thing that troubled so many people when that tape was first heard the night of the first round of the draft. It caused the Chiefs to send Hill away from the offseason program at the end of round one on that Thursday night back in April. So I'd like to think that someone, some way, somehow will be able to explain why that wasn't even mentioned in the statement, because that to me was the most glaring piece of evidence that cried out for some sort of potential discipline. But there was no discipline, and there was not even a mention of that troubling phrase that was directed to a woman that Tyreek Hill pleaded guilty to assaulting back in 2014 when she was pregnant with the boy who has been at the center of this controversy. Another interesting aspect of the Tyreek Hill decision, it came without the league having Tyreek Hill visit the NFL headquarters at 345 Park Avenue in New York City. Now, usually that meeting only happens as a precursor to discipline, but we just saw a few weeks ago Ezekiel Elliott was brought to the league office and he wasn't disciplined. So why bring Ezekiel Elliott and not discipline him? Well, I think there's a certain value to having that face-to-face confrontation, conversation, whatever we want to call it, with the commissioner as a way of ensuring that a guy will stay out of trouble going forward. The league apparently decided that Tyreek Hill didn't need that type of one-on-one double secret probation type of arrangement that Ezekiel Elliott seems to be under. Or the other side of it too, and I don't want to go too far into the weeds on this. It's possible that if the NFL would have summoned Tyreek Hill to the league office and then not disciplined him, it would have been a bigger deal. The reaction would have been stronger. See, ultimately, it's that reaction that the NFL is now bracing for, and I've got more on that coming up in a minute. Before I get to that point, though, another thing that we need to keep in mind, Crystal Espinal was not interviewed by the NFL as part of this process that resulted in no discipline for Tyreek Hill. The NFL reportedly tried on multiple occasions to talk to her, and she declined. And that's another flaw in this process. The NFL sets up an in-house justice system, but the NFL has no power over anyone not employed by the NFL. And if you have somebody who is willing to participate, like the former girlfriend of Ezekiel Elliott a couple of years ago, who was interviewed 6 times by the league as a result of, and as part of the process that resulted in a 6-game suspension for Elliott. If you have that kind of cooperation, it's easier to come to a final conclusion that there was a violation. Espinal decides not to cooperate, so it makes it harder to come to the conclusion that Tyreek Hill did anything wrong. Again, another flaw in this broader process, because the NFL can't always get the information that it needs to come to the conclusion that it may otherwise need to come to. And that leads me to the final point for today's PFTOT. And let's go back to square one. Why does the NFL have a personal conduct policy? Why does the NFL care about the things that football players do away from the football field, away from the football facility, away from the team? 7 months of an off season, on your own time, living your life. You get in trouble with the law. There's a resolution of that situation. No jail time, probation, whatever the case may be. Most other employers would look the other way. It's not our business. The only thing that matters to us is, are you able to show up and work? And if it gets to a point where you can't show up and work because you're incarcerated, then we have to deal with this employment issue. Now, look, some employers will blur that line, and there are instances where you need to blur that line. If you're a bus driver and you had a DUI, probably something that will affect your ability to continue to drive a bus. But for most employers, you have an incident away from work, it doesn't affect your ability to show up and work. It's none of the employer's business. It's between the employee and the criminal justice system. The NFL decided as a matter of PR. They decided it was good for business to care about and actively police the things that players do away from work. And that is something that had been lingering. And in 2007, thanks to Pac-Man Jones and the late Chris Henry, the NFL ramped up the punishment specifically for guys who have multiple incidents. Even if they're never arrested, even if they're never charged, even if they've never spent a day in jail, multiple incidents will get you in trouble more quickly than a scattered accusation, allegation, or confrontation somewhere out in public. So that was the way things worked from 2007 until 2014. Then came Ray Rice. And what happened with Ray Rice? The NFL initially suspended him 2 games based upon the information that was available to the NFL, including a video that we all saw of Ray Rice's then fiancée knocked out cold on the floor of an elevator as Ray Rice was standing there apparently trying to figure out what to do next. Now, after that 2-game suspension was announced, there was some blowback. There was some harsh criticism of the commissioner for only suspending Ray Rice for 2 games. Then came the video that the NFL either did or didn't have, or either knew or should have known what was on that video. I mean, we knew she was knocked out. Somehow she got knocked out. And then we see the video of the punch that knocked her out, and the NFL essentially ends Ray Rice's career. And that was the moment, because the commissioner's career was almost ended in the aftermath of the emergence of that video. Remember, it was the day after the start of the 2014 season. All hell broke loose. And the NFL should have been doing a victory lap after a great week 1 of action. Instead, the NFL was reeling. For a couple of weeks, the commissioner had to worry that his time as the man in charge of the sport was over. And I think at that moment, he decided that he'll never be accused again of going too softly on a player who was accused of doing something away from work, especially when it involves any type of domestic violence. We saw the personal conduct policy get beefed up. There was the Adrian Peterson situation, the Greg Hardy situation. And as of 2014, the NFL was ready to pounce on any player accused of any type of misconduct, especially involving family members, wives, girlfriends, children, etc. So, fast forward to 2017. That was when the NFL decided to throw the book at Ezekiel Elliott based upon what I believe was flimsy evidence and a poor procedure not aimed at giving Ezekiel Elliott a fair shot at defending himself. The NFL was determined to suspend him for 6 games. Again, the commissioner was never going to be accused of going too softly on a player who got into trouble off the field. So 6 games, period, that's it. Well, what happened in 2017 was 2 things. First of all, the TV ratings continued to plummet after 2016 when the ratings first dropped due to the presidential election. On top of that, in the aftermath of the Ezekiel Elliott suspension, what happened? Cowboys owner Jerry Jones went after the commissioner. Remember all of that? Commissioner was negotiating a new contract. Jerry Jones was trying to get that derailed. Jerry Jones wanted to get rid of the commissioner. And so the pendulum now, which had swung very sharply in favor of over-punishing players, now it starts moving in the other direction. And I think it was a combination of the assault by Jerry Jones on the commissioner and the idea that the TV ratings are down. What do we do to increase and enhance the TV ratings? Well, one of the things you do is you make sure the best players in the NFL are available to play. Ezekiel Elliott was gone from the team that is the biggest draw on national television for 37.5% of the entire regular season when that 6-game suspension finally began. So I think the NFL decided, and they didn't announce it, and they never would announce it, but they decided to be more lenient with players who potentially won't be allowed to play due to violation of the personal conduct policy or the substance abuse policy, because that's where we first noticed this shift. It was with Josh Gordon, Martavis Bryant, and Randy Gregory last year, as those three guys were reinstated after suspensions of at least a year. And there were reports and there were accounts of additional issues and problems and positive tests. And under the league's procedures, they should have been abruptly thrown out of the game for another minimum of 1 year. But they weren't. See, I feel like the NFL, and I firmly believe the NFL has decided that it's in the interests of the business to have the best possible players play football, that's what results in the ratings going up and ultimately recovering from that slump in 2016 and 2017. So that's where they are now, and that's the background, and that's why I believe the NFL, which easily could have suspended Tyreek Hill for 4 games, 8 games, 12 games, whatever, the NFL has realized that the potential impact on TV ratings and thus on the business of not having Hill available to play is greater than the potential impact on the business of letting Hill play and dealing with whatever the fallout may be. And really, what will the fallout be? Will there be protests? Will there be demonstrations? Will there be a call for a boycott of the NFL because the NFL didn't suspend Tyreek Hill? They've tried to thread this needle in a way that enhances the business. And, it's the league version of what we always say as it relates to individual teams. With individual teams, they find a way to make an excuse for a great player so the great player can continue to play. The NFL used to be immune from that. Now I think we see the league recognizing we need to have great players on the field. That if we don't have great players on the field, and if we're coming up with reasons to keep great players off the field, we are hurting our business. Bottom line, that's why Tyreek Hill wasn't suspended. And I believe that if this had happened 2 years ago, he would have been suspended just like Ezekiel Elliott was. And if you flip it, if Hill did what he did 2 years ago and Elliott did what he did this year, Elliott wouldn't have been suspended. He would have been the beneficiary of this realization that it's in the NFL's best interests to keep great players on the field and not concoct reasons to arbitrarily throw them out of the sport, whether it's 1 game, whether it's 1 year, whether it's 1 series. They want the best players on the field, and that's why Tyreek Hill wasn't suspended. And that's it for this week's editions of PFT OT. We got 1 more week of PFT OT only, and then PFT Live is back with a vengeance on July 29. Check us out all weekend long at profootballtalk.com, and we will see you back here on Monday.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.